friends and explorers seeking truth in the sacred waters of the Ganges River. Hello. We are stepping into the universe of Hindu mythology, woven with millions of gods, epic tales, and an endless cycle of reincarnation. The cosmic balance between the creator Brahma, the preserver Vishnu, and the destroyer Shiva has shaped life. Today, we will explore how Dharma, the divine order, is upheld, the unwavering justice of karma, and the avatars of Vishnu sent to save the world. In this universe, every end is the seed of a new beginning. I truly want to know who has made it through on this journey. In the beginning, the birth of the universe. A long, long time ago, before there were stars, skies, oceans, or even a sliver of light, there was only one thing: nothingness. A deep, endless silence filled this nothingness. No time ticked by, no winds blew. There was no earth to walk on, no sun to shine, no people, no gods, no sound. Just stillness, stretching in all directions like an endless night without dreams. But inside this great silence, hidden in the very heart of nothingness, there was a hum, not a sound like thunder or whisper, but a vibration, a living presence. It was the first sound that ever was, and it was called. This sacred sound, even though it seemed small, held all the energy of everything that would ever come to be. From it, the seeds of creation began to stir. Out of the sacred sound of An, a figure slowly emerged. He didn't rise with a bang or a flash, but floated up as if gently waking from a deep slumber. He had 4 heads, each facing a different direction, and a calm, wise face. His name was Brahma, the creator, and he had one purpose: to shape the universe. But Brahma didn't just pop into the air from nowhere. He appeared sitting on a beautiful pink lotus. And where did that lotus come from? It grew out of the navel of another mighty being, Lord Vishnu. Vishnu, the great preserver, was resting on the surface of the cosmic ocean. He wasn't floating on a raft or a boat, but lying peacefully on the coils of a massive multi-headed serpent named Shasha. Shasha's hoods spread out like a royal umbrella over Vishnu's head. Time hadn't started ticking yet, but Vishnu lay still, calm, and full of infinite potential. He was not asleep in the way we sleep, but in a trance-like rest, dreaming the birth of the universe. When the time was right, the lotus stem began to grow from Vishnu's navel, rising tall above the cosmic waters. At its blossom sat Brahma, confused and curious. He looked around and saw nothing but water and duck. He didn't know who he was, where he was, or what he was supposed to do. He searched in all directions, even down the lotus stem, hoping to find answers. But there was no one to guide him. So Brahma did what wise souls always do when they don't know what to do. He meditated. He closed his eyes, sat still, and focused on the silence. He listened deep. After what felt like ages, a voice from within whispered, "Create." And with that simple word, Brahma understood. He now knew he was born to build, to give shape to the shapeless, to turn nothing into everything. So he opened his eyes, raised his hands, and began. First, he created time. Without time, nothing could move or grow. Seconds, minutes, days, and ages flowed out from him like gentle rivers. Then he made the sky and the earth, placing the heavens above and the land below. Between them he stretched the vast space we now call the atmosphere. Next came the elements. He shaped fire, water, air, and earth, each with its own qualities. Fire brought warmth and light. Water flowed with emotion and movement. Air carried breath and freedom. earth grounded, all offering a solid base for life. From these elements, Brahma formed the mountains and valleys, the rivers and oceans, the forests and deserts. He painted the sky with stars, and placed the sun to rise, and he hung the moon to glow softly at night, and scattered constellations like jewels across the heavens. But what is a world without life? So Brahma breathed life into the world. He created plants, trees, and flowers of every color and scent. Birds filled the air with songs. Fish swam in the oceans, and animals roamed the land. Each creature had its place and purpose. Finally, he created human beings curious, emotional, full of wonder. He gave them minds to think, hearts to feel, and the power to choose. They could create, destroy, love, hate, dream, and despair. They would be tested, and they would grow. Brahma's work was not simple, or it took patience and vision. Every shape, every rule of nature, every heartbeat had to be just right. But once the world was alive and moving, Brahma felt joy like never before. The emptiness had become a living, breathing universe. But creation is only one part of the story. To keep the universe balanced, Brahma needed help. So from his thoughts, he gave form to two other mighty gods. One was Vishnu, the one he had unknowingly emerged from, the preserver who would keep order in the world. The other was Shiva, the destroyer, whose job would be to end things when their time had come so new things could begin. Together, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva formed a trio called the tree, the three forms of the divine. Brahma created, Vishnu preserved, and Shiva transfer. Each played a different role, but all worked together to keep the universe flowing like a great cosmic dance. And where there were gods, there would also be goddesses. Without them, the universe would be incomplete. Saraswati appeared as the goddess of wisdom and learning, seated on a white swan. She became Brahma's partner and helped him fill the world with knowledge and creativity. In the same way, Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth and fortune, emerged to stand beside Vishnu. She brought abundance and prosperity to those who were kind and just. And Parvati, the gentle yet powerful goddess, became Shiva's Khan. She had many forms, some soft and loving, others fierce and wild. With her by his side, Shiva balanced destruction with compassion. With gods and goddesses in place, with nature alive and humans awake, the universe began its first great cycle. Day turned to night, seasons changed, children were born, stories were lived. But even then, Brahma knew his job was not eternal. He had created time, and within time everything must move, change, and end. Even the universe he built would one day dissolve, and then it would all begin again. You see, in Hindu mythology, creation is not a one-time event. It happens again and again in cycle. Brahma lives for one day of the gods, called a kalpa, which lasts billions of human years. At the end of that day, the universe sleeps, just like Vishnu once did. Then, after a long night, creation begins again. And so from silence came sound. From darkness came light. From the unknown came form. And from the breath of Brahma came the entire universe. Even today, when people chant Ome, they connect with that first sound, the heartbeat of creation. It's a reminder that everything we see, feel, and experience comes from something ancient and sacred. And though Brahma is not worshipped as widely as other gods, his work remains all around us. In the trees that grow, the rivers that flow, the stars that shine, and the people who dream. The story of creation is not just about gods and cosmos. It's also about us. We are made from the same divine intention, from the same sacred sound, from the same spark that once lit the darkness. And in that sense, every one of us carries a little piece of Brahma's dream, the age of the gods, the early deeds of the divine. After Brahma created the world, the universe was vast and full of potential, but it was still young and there was much to be done. The gods had their roles, but they were not idle. Their energies filled the world with purpose. The first breaths of life stirred the heavens and things began to take shape, setting the stage for countless tales of courage, love, and conflict. The first divine deeds were not always grand or simple. In the beginning, the gods had their own battles to fight, their own struggles to endure. And sometimes these early challenges involved more than just grand acts of creation. They often began with the gods testing their own powers and discovering their places within the vast universe. Take Vishnu, for instance. Vishnu, the preserver, was known for his calm and peace, always watching over the world to make sure things stayed balanced. Yet even he had moments when things threatened to spiral into chaos. When he was resting on the serpent Shasha, he would sometimes drift into deep meditation, pondering the state of the world. But every so often, a great disturbance would call for his intervention. One of the earliest and most famous of these disturbances occurred when the demons known as the Asuras began to rise up against the gods. They were led by the powerful demon king Bali, whose ambition grew as large as the sky itself. Bali was a formidable ruler, full of strength and power, but his arrogance made him believe that he could defeat even the gods themselves. His rule began to cast a shadow over the heavens, and the gods were pushed to the edge of as the gods grew weaker. Vishnu knew that something had to be done, but rather than charge into battle, Vishnu came up with a brilliant plan, one that would eventually change the fate of the cosmos forever. He took the form of a beautiful dwarf, Vamana, and went to Bali's court. There, in front of the mighty demon king, Vamana asked for a small gift, 3 paces of land. Bali, impressed by the dwarf's humble request, agreed without hesitation. But what Bali didn't realize was that this humble dwarf was no ordinary being. The moment the gift was granted, Vamana expanded, growing taller and taller until he towered over Bali's entire kingdom. With each step, he covered vast lands. In just 3 paces, he stepped across the entire universe, reclaiming everything that had been taken by the demons and restoring balance. Vishnu, in the form of Vamana, taught Bali a vital lesson that day. Sometimes the greatest power is not in brute force, but in wisdom and humility. Bali, though defeated, was deeply moved by the god's cleverness and granted one final wish. Vishnu allowed him to return to his kingdom, though he would always have to rule from the underworld, reminding Bali that even the greatest of rulers can be humbled. After this, Vishnu continued his work protecting the world and ensuring that the balance was maintained. But other gods had their own deeds to perform. One such god was Shiva, the destroyer, whose role was to maintain the cyclical nature of the universe. Shiva was not only a god of destruction, but also of transformation. His power was immense, and his energy often seemed wild and untamed. Yet he was an essential part of the divine order. Shiva was known for his deep meditation and his connection to the cosmic rhythm, but his peaceful nature hid an inner power that could not be ignored. Once, when the demon Antika began to terrorize the world, Shiva had to step in. Anta was a monster born from the darkness, a son of Shiva's own mind, but one who had been corrupted by greed and malice. He grew stronger every day, threatening the very foundations of the universe. Shiva, in his form of Rudra, knew that to stop Anta, he needed to confront the darkness within himself. The battle between father and son was not just physical, it was spiritual. Shiva had to battle not just Anta's army, but his own feelings of guilt and sorrow. He fought not just for the world, but for the redemption of his own heart. Finally, after a fierce battle, Shiva's power overwhelmed Antika and the demon was destroyed. But Shiva did not celebrate. Instead, he retreated into deep contemplation, reflecting on the cycle of life and death and the nature of destruction itself. For Shiva, destruction was not an end, but a necessary part of the world's transformation. In another part of the world, Brahma continued his work of creation, shaping the world and its many beings. One of the most fascinating creations was that of the great river Ganga. Ganga was not just any river. She was a goddess in her own right, a divine being who would bring purification and grace to the earth. The story of Ganga's descent is one of the most beloved in Hindu mythology, filled with drama and divine intervention. According to the tale, Ganga lived in the heavens, flowing from the feet of Vishnu. She had the power to wash away sins, purifying even the most corrupted of souls. But there was a problem. Ganga's mighty river was too powerful to descend to the earth without causing destruction. The world could not bear the force of her flow. It was then that King Birth, a noble ruler, prayed fervently to Brahma for help. He wanted Ganga to descend to earth so that she could cleanse his ancestors' souls who had been cursed by the gods. Brahma, impressed by the king's devotion, agreed. But he knew that Ganga's descent had to be controlled. Brahma instructed the mighty god Shiva to catch Ganga's river in his hair, for only Shiva had the strength to bear her force. When Ganga finally descended, her waters flowed with tremendous force, crashing into the earth with thunderous power. Shiva, with his immense hair, caught her and spread her out over his locks, easing the impact of her descent. As Ganga flowed over the earth, she purified the lands, healing the people and washing away their sins. She became known as the holiest of rivers, a symbol of divine grace and the power of water. And then there was Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom and learning, who had her own important role to play in the divine dance. Saraswati emerged from Brahma's mind, embodying all the knowledge that he had created. She was a goddess of music, art, and wisdom, and her powers were meant to inspire creativity and intellect in the world. Her sacred river, also called Saraswati, was believed to be the source of all knowledge. With her Venera, a musical instrument in hand, Saraswati was often depicted as a serene goddess, spreading her wisdom to those who sought it. She would visit the minds of sages and scholars, inspiring them with thoughts and ideas that would change the world. Her beauty was not just physical, it was the beauty of intellect and harmony of ideas that could reshape the world and hearts that could uplift others. And so with each new god and goddess, the world continued to evolve. The divine presence was felt in every aspect of life, from the sun that rose each day to the small moments of kindness shared between strangers. The gods weren't just figures in the heavens. They were present in the everyday miracles that shaped existence. The early deeds of the gods, whether it was Vishnu's cleverness, Shiva's transformative power, or Saraswati's wisdom, showed the world that everything in the universe was connected. It was not just the gods who shaped the world, but also the people who learned from them and followed their paths. The divine dance was ever ongoing, and with each step, the universe grew stronger, more vibrant and more alive. The great epic, the Mahabharata, and the rise of the Kuru dynasty. In the heart of ancient India, nestled between the rolling hills and vast plains, there was a kingdom known as Kuru. This kingdom, though small, would come to play a central role in one of the greatest epics in all of human history. The story of the Kuru dynasty is not just a tale of kings and warriors. It is a story of family, destiny, and the clash of ideal. It is the story of the rise and fall of a dynasty that would shape the future of the world. The story begins with King Shantanu, a ruler of great wisdom and strength, who was beloved by his people. Shantanu's reign was marked by peace and prosperity, but it was also a time of profound personal struggle. Though Shantanu was a just and powerful king, there was one thing he lacked: an heir to the throne. He had sons, but none from his beloved wife Ganga, a celestial river goddess who had come to live among humans. Their story would be one of love, sacrifice, and tragedy. Ganga, though divine, was bound by a promise that she had made long ago. She had agreed to marry Shantanu, but only if he swore to never question her actions. During their marriage, Ganga gave birth to 8 children, each of whom she cast into the river as soon as they were born. Shantanu, heartbroken and confused, could not understand why his wife would take such a cruel and inexplicable action. But as per his vow, he remained silent until one day Ganga revealed the truth. The children, it turned out, were not ordinary beings. They were celestial beings, sons of the gods sent to earth to fulfill a higher purpose. Ganga's actions were not out of cruelty, but were part of a divine plan. The 8th child, however, was destined to change the course of history. This child, who would later be known as Bhishma, was the one who would carry the legacy of the Kuru dynasty forward with all its glory and tragedy. Bhishma was born with the blessing of the gods and grew up to be a warrior of unmatched skill and virtue. He was known for his strength, his unwavering loyalty, and his deep sense of duty. But his life was marked by a tragic sacrifice. Bhishma had taken a vow of celibacy, renouncing any chance of having a family of his own. This decision was made in order to secure the throne for his father's line, ensuring that the Kuru dynasty would thrive even if it meant denying himself the pleasures of love. His sacrifice would be one of the most powerful and heartbreaking themes of the Mahabharata, a symbol of duty, honor, and the burdens that come with great responsibility. As Shantanu's reign continued, he eventually married again, this time to a woman. Nenid Sasha Satyati was the daughter of a fisherman, and though she was humble by birth, she had a powerful influence over the future of the Kuru dynasty. Satyati had 2 sons, Chitaranga and Vichtravarya, and it was these 2 sons who would become central figures in the dynasty's struggle for power. Chitranga, the elder of the 2, was a great warrior, but his life was cut short in battle. This left Vichtravarya, the younger brother, to inherit the throne. But Vikrya was weak, and his reign was plagued by challenges. With no heirs of his own, the Kuru dynasty's future seemed uncertain. That is when the great sage Vyasa, a figure of immense wisdom and power, entered the scene. Vyasa was the son of the sage Parasara and the river goddess Matsyanda, and he was known for his ability to see the future. He was called upon by Satyavati to help secure the dynasty's future, in a move that would forever change the course of history. Vyasa fathered 3 sons with Sasha's daughters-in-law, who were child. The first of these sons was Drastashra, born blind, but with a great strength of character. The second was Pandu, a prince who, though he was powerful, was cursed by the god. The third was Vidura, a wise and virtuous figure who would play a crucial role in the events that follow. These 3 sons, Dharastra, Pandu, and Vidura, would become the central figures in the Mahabharata, each representing different ideals of leadership, justice, and morality. The story of Dharastra, Pandu, and Vidura is a tale of Contra, Dharastra. The eldest son, was born blind, a curse that would shadow his life and his reign. Despite his blindness, he was a man of great wisdom, and he ruled the Kuru kingdom with the help of his advisor and friend Vidya. However, Dhritarashtra's blind spot was not just physical, it was also moral. His inability to see the truth of his own family's actions and his indulgence in his son Duryodhana's ambitions would lead to the downfall of the Kuruanist. Pandu, on the other hand, was born with great strength and promise. He had the potential to be a great king, but he was cursed by the gods. The curse prevented him from fathering children, which was a blow to his sense of duty and legacy. But like his father, Pandu was not one to accept defeat easily. He sought the guidance of the sages, and through their intervention he was blessed with 5 sons, Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, and Sahudeva, who would become known as the Pandava. These 5 sons were destined to play pivotal roles in the unfolding drama of the Mahabharata. The Pandavas were raised with great love and care, but their path to power was not an easy one. Their cousin, Duryodhana, the son of Dhritarashtra, was their bitter rival. Duryodhana was a man of ambition and pride, and he harbored a deep resentment toward the Pandavas, who he believed were the rightful heirs to the throne. The rivalry between Duryodhana and the Pandavas grew stronger with each passing year, leading to a series of challenges, deceptions and betrayals that would ultimately culminate in the Great War of Kurukshetra. As the tensions between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, Duryodhana's faction escalated, alliances were formed, and the gods themselves began to take sides. The divine forces that had watched over the Kuru dynasty for generations now intervened more directly in the affairs of mortal. Vishnu, through his incarnation as Krishna, became a key figure in the conflict, offering guidance to the Pandavas and helping them navigate the treacherous political landscape. Krishna's role as a divine charioteer would prove to be one of the most critical elements of the Mahabharata, as he delivered some of the most profound teachings ever spoke. The stage was set for the Great War at Kurukshetra, a battle that would not only decide the fate of the Kuru dynasty, but would also be a moment of profound spiritual significance. The lessons learned from the Mahabharata are timeless, offering insights into the nature of duty, honor, justice, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. The story of the Mahabharata is not just a historical account. It is a spiritual and philosophical journey that continues to resonate with people across the world. The Great War, the Kurukshetra battlefield, and the Bhagavad Gita, the conflict that had been brewing between the Pandyas and the Kauravas for so many years, finally reached its boiling point after years of rivalry, deceit, and betrayals. The stage was set for a war that would change the course of history and leave an indelible mark on the souls of all who witnessed it. This was no ordinary war. It was the great battle of Kurukshetra, a clash between 2 mighty factions that would pit brothers against brothers, cousins against cousins, and friends against friends. And at the heart of this conflict stood a battlefield that would not only witness the bloodshed of warriors, but would also serve as the setting for one of the most profound spiritual discourses ever recorded, the Bhagavad Gita. As the armies of the Pandyas and Kauravas lined up for battle, the air was thick with tension. The sounds of conch shells, drums, and war cries echoed across the plains of Kurukshetra, filling the atmosphere with an ominous energy. On one side stood the Pandyas, noble and righteous, but burdened with the knowledge that they were about to wage a war against their own kin. On the other side stood the Kauravas, led by the ambitious and ruthless Duryodhana, who was determined to claim the throne of Hastinapura, no matter the cost. The Pandavas were led by Yudhishthira, the eldest and wisest of the 5 brothers. He was a king who had always acted with integrity and honor. But he knew that the war they were about to fight was one of great consequence. The war was not just a fight for land or power. It was a fight for justice, for the restoration of Dharma. The righteous Yudhishthira, though burdened by the weight of his duty, was resolute in his belief that this was a war they had to his brothers. Bhima, Arjuna, Nola, and Sahadeva stood beside him, each with their own unique strengths and abilities, ready to fight for what they believed was right. On the Kauriva side, Duryodhana, the eldest of the Kauriva brothers, had gathered an army of mighty warriors, many of whom were legendary figures in their own right. Among them were Bhishma, the great patriarch of the Kuru dynasty, Drona, the master of arms, and Karna, a warrior of unmatched skill and loyalty to Duryodhana's desire for power knew no bounds, and he was willing to sacrifice everything, even his own family, to achieve his goals. His arrogance and pride, however, blinded him to the righteousness of the Pandya's cause. As the two armies faced each other on the battlefield, the air was thick with the weight of destiny. Both sides knew that this battle would not only determine the fate of the Kuru dynasty, but would also shape the future of the entire world. The clash of arms, the cries of the fallen, and the roar of the chariots would soon echo in the hearts of those who fought and those who would listen to their story for generations to come. But before the first arrow was fired, there was a moment of deep reflection, an opportunity for one of the greatest spiritual dialogues in history to unfold. It was in this moment of stillness, just before the war began, that Krishna, the divine charioteer of Arjuna, spoke. Krishna, though born as a mortal prince, was an incarnation of Vishnu, one of the supreme deities of the Hindu pantheon. He had come to the battlefield not only to guide the Pandyas, but to impart divine wisdom to all who would listen. Krishna's role in the Mahabharata was not merely as a warrior or a kingmaker. He was a guide, a teacher, and a divine force that transcended the limits of mortal understanding. As the two armies prepared for battle, Arjuna, the greatest warrior among the Pandyas, stood on the battlefield, gazing across at the Kauriva army. Arjuna was troubled. He had fought many battles in his life, but this one was different. The thought of fighting his own family, his cousins, his teachers, and even his beloved grandfather, Bhishma, filled him with sorrow and despair. He could not understand how he could justify killing his own kin, even if they were on the side of the enemy. Arjuna's heart was heavy and his mind was clouded with doubt. In this moment of crisis, he turned to Krishna seeking guidance. "Krishna," Arjuna said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I do not wish to fight. How can I raise my bow against my own relatives, my teachers, and my friends? It is better to renounce the kingdom and live in exile than to kill those I love. I am filled with sorrow and my hands tremble. Please tell me what is right." Krishna, with his divine wisdom, looked at Arjuna and saw the turmoil in his heart. He understood Arjuna's pain, but he also knew that the moment of truth had arrived. The fate of the world rested on this very moment. And Arjuna's inner conflict was not just his own. It was the reflection of a much larger struggle. Krishna knew that the war could not be avoided. But more importantly, Arjuna needed to understand the deeper truth of Dharma, the righteous path. With a calm and compassionate voice, Krishna began to speak. He explained to Arjuna that the battle was not merely a physical conflict. It was a spiritual battle, a struggle between the forces of good and evil, between righteousness and unrighteousness. Krishna reminded Arjuna that life and death were part of the eternal cycle of existence, and that the soul was never born and never dies. The body, Krishna explained, was temporary, but the soul was eternal. By refusing to fight, Arjuna would be abandoning his duty, his Dharma as a warrior. He would be failing to fulfill his role in the cosmic order of the universe. Krishna also taught Arjuna the nature of duty or karma. He explained that one must act without attachment to the results of their actions. Actions must be performed selflessly as an offering to the divine without concern for personal gain or loss. Krishna encouraged Arjuna to rise above his doubts and fears and to fight not for personal glory but for the greater good, the protection of Dharma, the preservation of justice, and the defeat of adharma or unrighteousness. As Krishna spoke, a sense of peace and clarity began to settle in Arjuna's heart. He realized that his duty as a warrior was not just to fight for victory, but to fight for righteousness, for the protection of the innocent, and for the restoration of balance in the world. Arjuna's fear and doubt began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of purpose and determination. He understood now that this war was not about personal loss or gain. It was about fulfilling his divine duty regardless of the out with renewed strength and resolve. Arjuna stood tall, his doubts dispelled by the wisdom of Krishna. The battle lines were drawn and the war was about to begin. But before the first arrow was released, Arjuna turned to Krishna and said, "I will fight, Krishna. I will fulfill my duty and I will fight for righteousness. But I need your guidance. You are my teacher and I am your student. Please lead me through this battle." Thus, the great war of Kurukshetra began not just as a physical conflict between two armies, but as a profound spiritual journey. The teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, shared between Krishna and Arjuna, would echo through the ages, offering wisdom and guidance to all who seek to understand the nature of duty, righteousness, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. The war would claim many lives, but it would also reveal deep truths about the nature of existence, the power of devotion, and the importance of following one's Dharma. The war begins. The warriors of Kurukshetra, the battlefield of Kurukshetra, had become a sacred ground, the stage where history would be written in blood and glory, with the sound of conch shells signaling the commencement of the great war. The armies of the Pandyas and the Kauravas stood ready to clash in what would be a battle unlike any the world had seen. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows over the plains as thousands of chariots, horses, and foot soldiers prepared for the fight of their lives. The air was thick with anticipation, and every warrior knew that the outcome of this war would shape not just their futures, but the very fate of the world. As the conch shells bled once more, Arjuna, the mighty Pandya archer, sat upon his chariot, his bow held tightly in his hand. His heart, once filled with doubt and sorrow, had now found resolve thanks to the divine counsel of Krishna, his charioteer and guide. Arjuna knew that this war was not just about personal gain. It was a struggle to protect Dharma, the righteous path, and to restore justice to a world that had been overrun by adharma, the forces of unrighteousness. He felt a sense of duty burn within him, a calling to fight not just for himself, but for all that was good and just in the world. Beside him, the divine Krishna sat with a calm demeanor, his eyes glowing with an inner light that transcended the mortal realm. He was not just a charioteer. He was the Supreme Being incarnate, and his wisdom would guide Arjuna through the storm of battle and beyond. Krishna had already imparted to Arjuna the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, urging him to act without attachment, to rise above his fear and hesitation, and to fight for the greater good. But now the time for words was over. The war had begun, and the battlefield of Kurukshetra was about to witness the fiercest clash of warriors the world had ever known. Across the battlefield on the Kaurava side, Duryodhana, the eldest of the Kaurava brothers, stood tall in his chariot, his eyes fixed on the enemy. His heart burned with a desire for power and his ambition to claim the throne of Hasty. Nipura had driven him to the point of no return. He had gathered the mightiest of warriors to his cause, men who had fought in countless battles and who were known for their skill and bravery. Among these warriors were Bhishma, the revered patriarch of the Kuru family, Drona, the greatest teacher of martial arts, Karna, the peerless archer, and Shakuni, the master of strategy and deceit. The Kaurava army was vast and powerful, a force to be reckoned with. But Duryodhana's heart was filled with anger and pride, and he was blind to the righteousness of the Pandavas' cause. As the armies began to move into position, the sound of drums and war cries filled the air. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the chariots and the horses, and the tension between the two sides was palpable. The warriors knew that this battle would not be won by mere strength or skill. It would be decided by fate itself. The gods were watching, and the forces of destiny had already been set in motion. The battlefield was alive with energy, and every man and woman who stood upon it understood that they were part of something much greater than themselves. The first move was made by Bhishma, the grandsire of the Kaurava and Pandava families and one of the greatest warriors of his time. He was a man of honor bound by his vows to fight for the Kauravas, even though he knew that the cause was unjust. Bhishma had taken a sacred vow of celibacy and renounced all claims to the throne. But his loyalty to the Kaurava side ran deep. As the battle began, Bhishma charged forward, his mace raised high. Leading the Kaurava forces into his presence on the battlefield was a beacon of strength, and the Pandavas knew that they would have to face his might if they were to have any hope of victory. On the Pandava side, the warriors prepared for the ons. Bhima, the second eldest of the Pandyas, was the first to charge into battle. Known for his immense strength and fury, Bhima was a force to be reckoned with. He wielded his mace with skill and precision, smashing through the ranks of the Kauravas as if they were mere toys. Bhima's roar echoed across the battlefield, and his enemies trembled at the sight of he fought with the fury of a lion. His mind focused on the task at hand, defeating the Kauravas and ensuring justice was served. Arjuna too played his part in the battle. As the world's greatest archer, he moved through the battlefield with grace and precision, his bow releasing arrows faster than the eye could see. His arrows struck down the Kaurava warriors one by one, each shot a testament to his skill and mastery. But as he fought, Arjuna's heart remained heavy. Even as his hands released arrow after arrow, he could not shake the image of his family, his beloved elders and cousins falling before him. Each life he took weighed on his soul, and the question of right and wrong gnawed at him. But still he fought, for the world needed justice, and the war had to be won. Krishna, ever the guide, was with Arjuna every step of the way. From his chariot he offered words of wisdom, urging Arjuna to remain steadfast in his duty. He reminded him that this battle was not about personal emotions. It was about Dharma, about protecting the world from the forces of Adharma. With each word, Krishna helped Arjuna overcome his inner conflict and find strength in his purpose. Krishna's role in the battle was not to fight. It was to guide, to offer wisdom, and to ensure that the right path was followed. As the day wore on, the battle raged with increasing intensity. The ground was littered with fallen warriors, and the air was thick with the sounds of clashing swords, the cries of the wounded and the battle cries of the fighters. Every warrior on the battlefield knew that this was a fight for survival. a fight to protect their honor, their families, and their kingdoms. But as the sun began to set, there was no clear victory. The battle had only just begun, and the warriors of Karakra would fight for days, weeks, and even months to come. Among the Kariva warriors, Karna, the great archer, had taken the field. Karna, born to the Princess Kanti, the mother of the Pandyas, had been raised by a charioteer and had never known his true heritage. Despite the harshness of his circumstances, Karna had grown to become one of the greatest archers the world had ever known. His loyalty to Duryodhana, his best friend and ally, ran deep, and he fought with unparalleled skill and determination. Karna's arrows flew like lightning, and his enemies trembled at his presence on the battle. But Karna's greatest challenge was yet to come. In the coming days, the clash between him and Arjuna would become one of the most legendary moments in the history of Kurukshetra. The rivalry between the two great archers was a rivalry of fate, one that had been building for years, and as the sun dipped below the horizon on the first day of battle, it was clear that this war was only just beginning. The warriors of Kurukshetra would continue to fight, each one driven by their own reasons, their own destinies. But in the end, it would not be the warriors who decided the outcome. It would be the divine will of the god, the great warriors, the clash of titans. The battle at Kurukshetra was unlike any other ever fought in the world. A war where not only armies but the very fabric of destiny was at stake. As the days unfolded, the fight between the Pandyas and the Kauravas became more intense, and the warriors on both sides revealed the depth of their skills and their resolve. But it was not just any ordinary clash of warriors. It was a confrontation between titans where each individual had a story to tell, and their actions would determine the fate of the world itself. On the side of the Pandyas, Arjuna stood out as the greatest archer to ever walk the earth, his name whispered with awe and respect by those who had witnessed his skill. He was the pride of his family, a warrior who had been trained under the finest tutors, including the great Drona, and had learned the art of war in the forests, the mountains, and in the field. But as the war began, Arjuna found himself facing not only his own doubts, but also the enormity of the challenge ahead. He had been thrust into the battle by the forces of fate, and no matter how hard he fought to reconcile the man he was with, the warrior he needed to become, the battle was relentless. Still, he remained a beacon of hope for his side, a symbol of righteousness and strength. Alongside him fought his brothers, Bhima, Yudhishthira, Nakula, and Saha. Each of them had their own unique qualities, and their bond was one of the few things that could withstand the chaos of war. Bhima, the second eldest, was a force of nature, strong, fierce, and unstoppable. When Bhima entered the battlefield, the very earth trembled. Beneath his weapon of choice was a massive mace, and it was said that when he swung it, it could crush anything in its path, whether it was a stone, a tree, or even a warrior. Bhima fought with a fury that few could match, driven not just by the desire for victory, but by the memories of the wrongs that had been done to his family. His battles were not just a matter of pride or strategy. They were deeply personal, and every strike he made was a way to avenge the injustices they had suffered. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandyas, was a contrast to his brothers, where Bhima was driven by anger and strength. Yudhishthira was the embodiment of Dharma, the righteous path. He was the king in spirit, even though the throne had been denied to him for so many years. Yudhishthira's weapon was a sword, but his true strength lay in his mind and his sense of justice. He was a thinker, a strategist, and a leader who always sought to do what was right, even when it seemed impossible. The people who fought for him trusted him implicitly, and they believed that under his rule, the world would be a better place. Nakala and Sahadeva, the twin brothers, were no less important. Both had been trained in the ways of warfare and were exceptionally skilled in sword fighting and mounted combat. Nakala was known for his agility, able to move through the battlefield like the wind, cutting down his enemies with precision. Sahadeva, on the other hand, was the wise one, a master of strategy and intelligence. Together, they formed a powerful duo. They combined skills, making them formidable opponents on the battle. Their bond as twins went beyond blood. It was a connection built on years of trust, shared struggles, and a common goal. However, the Kaurava side was equally powerful, with warriors who had earned their place in history as some of the greatest to ever live. Chief among them was Bhishma, the grandsire of both the Pandyas and the Kauravas. Bhishma was a towering figure not only in stature but also in his commitment to his vows. He had chosen to remain celibate and had given up the throne of Hastinapura to serve the kingdom with honor. His loyalty to the Kauravas was unquestionable, and he was willing to sacrifice anything, even his own happiness, for the sake of his duty. Bhishma's skill with the bow and arrow was legendary, and it was said that his arrows never missed their mark. When Bhishma entered the fray, the very ground seemed to shake under the force of his presence, and the Pandyas knew that they had to face him hidden if they hoped to secure Vic. Then there was Drona, the teacher of both the Pandyas and the Kauravas, and one of the most skilled warriors in the world. Drona had taught Arjuna everything he knew about archery and had trained the Kauravas in the arts of war. His knowledge was vast and his strategic mind was unmatched. Drona's loyalty to the Kauravas was absolute, and even though he had once considered the Pandyas as his own students, he had made the choice to fight on the side of Durga, the Kaurava prince. Drona was a man of great integrity, but his sense of honor and duty had led him to fight for a cause that was deeply flawed. His skill with the bow was extraordinary, and his use of the divine weapons granted to him by the gods made him an even more dangerous Karna. The greatest archer on the Kaurava side was a figure shrouded in mystery. Born to the Princess Kunti before her marriage, Karna was the eldest of the Pandyas, though neither he nor anyone else knew this. Raised by the charioteer Adira, Karna had grown up facing the hardships of life, but he had never let them break him. His loyalty to Duryodhana was unshakable, and he had fought countless battles with the Kauravas. Karna's archery was said to rival Arjuna's, and there were many who believed that he was the only one who could defeat the great Pandava warrior. But Karna's journey was a tragic one, as he constantly struggled with his sense of identity. His loyalty to Duryodhana and the bitter knowledge of his true heritage. Karna was a man torn between fate and free will, a hero whose story would eventually become one of the most tragic in the As the battle raged on, these warriors, each with their own strengths, their own reasons for fighting, clashed with one another in ways that shook the earth. Arjuna and Karna, both masters of the bow, faced off in an epic duel that would go down in history. The sky was filled with arrows, and the earth was covered in the dust of their conflict. Bhima and Duryodhana, the two men driven by vengeance and pride, faced each other in a battle that seemed destined to end in blood. Yudhishthira and Drona, two men of great intellect and honor, fought each other not just with weapons, but with their minds. The warriors of Kurukshetra were not just soldiers. They were symbols of the forces of good and evil, of Dharma and Adharma, and the world watched as they clashed. And yet, as the sun set on the second day of battle, there was still no clear victor. The warriors fought with all their might, but they were evenly matched, and the tide of battle seemed to shift with every moment. The gods themselves watched from the heavens, knowing that the outcome of this war would affect the very course of the world. Each side had its own gods, its own fate, and the gods would not remain neutral for long. The war was not just a battle for the throne of Hastapura. It was a battle for the soul of the world, and its outcome would resonate through the ages. The clash of these titans had only just begun. The warriors of Kurukshetra, driven by duty, by pride, by love, and by hatred, would fight until the very end. But in the end, it was not the warriors who would decide the fate of the world. It was the divine forces that guided their actions. The destruction of the Kauravas. The battle at Kurukshetra had raged for days, and with each passing moment, it seemed that the conflict was becoming less about victory and more about a force greater than any mortal could comprehend. The warriors, each driven by their own sense of duty, hatred, or righteousness, fought with a ferocity that left the earth beneath them trembling. But as the days turned into weeks, it became increasingly clear that the end was nearing and the fate of the Kauravas, those who had dared to usurp the rightful throne, was sealed. The moment of reckoning had come, and it was now only a matter of time before the tide of destiny turned irrevocably against them. It was on the 10th day of battle that the seeds of the Kauravas' destruction were planted. The Kaurava army, though formidable, was beginning to feel the weight of their losses. Each day that passed brought with it more casualties. More warriors lost in the struggle for a kingdom that was never meant to be theirs. On the side of the Pandyas, the morale was high, led by the indomitable Arjuna, the might of Bhima, and the wisdom of Yudhishthira. The winds of fate had shifted, and the Kauravas could feel it in their bones. But even in their darkest hour, the caravans did not relent. They fought with all their might, unwilling to surrender, knowing that if they were to fall, they would do so only after every ounce of their strength had been spent. The chief architect of the Kauravs' downfall was none other than the great Bhishma. The grands of both the Kar and the Pand, Bhishma was a man of immense strength, wisdom, and courage, and his resolve was unwavering. That it was his loyalty to the Kauravas, his duty as the protector of Hastinapura, that bound him to a cause he knew was Bhishma had fought on behalf of his family, not because he believed in their right to rule, but because of his oath, his solemn vow to protect the throne of Hastinapura, no matter the cost. But as the battle wore on, Bhishma's heart grew heavy with doubt. He had fought valiantly, leading the Kaurava forces with unmatched skill. But he knew deep down that the Pandyas were the true heirs to the throne and their victory was inevitable. Arjuna, recognizing the pivotal moment, sought the guidance of Lord Krishna, his charioteer and divine friend. Krishna had always been Arjuna's mentor, offering wisdom and insight in times of crisis. As the battle reached its zenith, Arjuna turned to Krishna, seeking a way to defeat Bhishma, the man who had been his teacher and protector. Krishna, with a gleam in his eye, knew that the only way to defeat Bhishma was to break his spirit, because despite his great strength, Bhishma's mind and heart were the keys to his downfall. Krishna devised a plan that would eventually lead to Bhishma's fall, a plan that would shake the very foundation of the Kaurava army and bring them closer to their doom. As the battle continued, the Kauravas began to realize that their strategy was their warriors, who had once fought with unyielding determination, were now slowly losing hope. Bhishma, despite his strength, was beginning to show signs of weariness, his divine armor starting to lose its shine. On the other side, the Pandavas were growing stronger with each victory, their warriors gaining confidence and showing no signs of faltering. It became clear that the Kauravi were losing the war, and the only way to salvage the situation was to strike at the heart of the Pand. Resolve at Arjuna himself. Duryodhana, the Kaurava prince, was desperate. He had seen the destruction of his army and the falling of his greatest warriors, but he could not accept defeat. The thought of losing everything he had fought for, the throne of Hanapura, was unbearable. He turned to his trusted advisor, the great warrior, Karna, for counsel. Karna, ever loyal to Duryodhana, offered his guidance, and together they devised a strategy to eliminate Arjuna. But even Karna, with all his skill and power, knew that defeating Arjuna would not be easy. Arjuna was no ordinary warrior, and Karna was keenly aware that the fate of the war rested on his ability to bring down his great rival. The two warriors, Arjuna and Karna, met in the heat of battle. The sky above seemed to tremble as they faced off, their arrows flying with incredible speed and precision. Karna, with his unmatched skill and the divine weapons bestowed upon him by the gods, sought to overwhelm Arjuna. But Arjuna, with his devotion to Lord Krishna and his unwavering resolve, matched him blow for blow. The battle between the two archers was a test of wills, each one refusing to yield to the other. But as the fight raged on, it became evident that fate had chosen its champion. Arjuna's arrows found their mark time and time again, while Karna's strikes, though powerful, seemed to miss their target. Meanwhile, the tide of battle was shifting once again, and the Pandavas, now bolstered by their success, were pushing forward with renewed determination. The Kaurava forces, battered and broken, began to falter. The warriors, who had once been feared and revered, were now showing signs of exhaustion and fear. Bhishma, seeing the inevitable approach of defeat, made a fateful decision. In a final act of honor, he laid down his weapons and allowed himself to fall into the hands of the enemy. A sacrifice that would mark the beginning of the end for the Kauravas. His fall sent shockwaves through the Kaurava ranks, and with it, their hope for victory began to crumble. The end for the Kauravas was not a swift one, but it was inevitable. As the battle drew to a close, the remaining Kaurava warriors were picked off one by one, their strength and resolve no match for the unstoppable force of the Pandavas. Duryodhana, the prince who had led his people into the fray, was left to face the consequences of his actions, alone and broken. Duryodhana retreated to the banks of a nearby lake, where, in his final moments, he sought the solace of the waters. But there would be no peace for Duryodhana, no escape from the consequences of his pride and ambition. The Pandavas, in their righteous anger, would not let him go unpunished. In a final confrontation, Bhima, with a vengeance burning in his heart, struck Duryodhana down, ending the life of the last of the Kauravas. With the death of Duryodhana, the war was finally over. The Kauravas were no more, and the Pandavas had emerged victorious. But the victory was bittersweet. The battlefield of Kurukshetra was littered with the bodies of the fallen, both Kaura and Pandava alike. The destruction of the Kauravas had been necessary, but it had come at a great cost. The world had been forever changed, and the memory of the great battle would echo through the ages. The Pandavas, having reclaimed their kingdom, knew that their task was far from over. They had won the war, but the wounds of the battlefield would take years to heal. They had seen the destruction that ambition and pride could bring, and they vowed never to repeat the mistakes that had led to this war. The story of the Kauravas, of their rise and fall, would be told for generations. A cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of ignoring Dharma. And so the Kurukshetra war came to an end. The Kauravas destroyed, and the Pandavas, now rulers of Hastinapura, took their place in history. But the legacy of that great war would live on, and the lessons learned would shape the course of the future. The ascension of the Pandyas, the dust of the battlefield at Kurukshetra, had settled, and with it the echoes of war had begun to fade into the winds of time. The Kauravas, once proud and powerful, lay defeated, their ambition buried beneath the weight of their own down. The Pandyas, victorious but weary, stood amid the ruins of the battle, their hearts heavy with the burden of the destruction they had wrought. They had fought for justice, for the right to rule, but the cost of that victory was steep. The death of so many, the destruction of families, the loss of countless lives. These were the things they could not undo, no matter how much they might wish otherwise. But now the time had come for the Pandyas to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The throne of Hastapura. The city, once a symbol of power and glory, now stood silent, its streets empty, its walls scarred by the echoes of conflict. The people of Hastinapura, though they had long awaited the return of the Pandyas, were unsure of what kind of rulers they would be. Would they bring peace and prosperity? Or would the shadow of the war hang over them forever, a constant reminder of the bloodshed that had paved their way to the throne? The Pandyas, with Yudhisthira at their helm, knew that their journey was far from over. They had won the war, but their greatest challenge lay ahead. The task of ruling justly, of restoring order to a kingdom torn apart by years of conflict. Yudhisthira, the eldest of the 5 brothers, was the rightful king of Hastapura. But he understood that kingship was not simply about wearing a crown. It was about responsibility, about making difficult decisions, and about ensuring the welfare of the people. He had spent many years on the battlefield, but now he would face the greatest test of his life, ruling with wisdom and compassion in a world that had been ravaged by war. As the Pandavas entered Hastapura, they were met with a mixture of joy and apprehension. The people, though grateful for their return, were unsure of how to welcome the brothers. They had lived through the years of the Kaurava rule, which had been marked by tyranny and cruelty, and now they faced the uncertain future of a new era. The Pandyas, for their part, were determined to be the rulers the kingdom needed, leaders who would heal the wounds of the past and guide their people toward a brighter future. They knew it would not be easy, but they were ready to take on the challenge. Yudhisthira, as the eldest, was crowned the king of Hastinapura in a grand ceremony that took place in the heart of the city. The streets were lined with people, some of whom had once sided with the Kauravas, while others had long awaited the return of the true heirs. The ceremony was a solemn one, marked by prayers and rituals meant to ensure the prosperity of the kingdom. As Yudhisthira sat upon the throne, he was acutely aware of the weight of the crown upon his head. It was not just a symbol of power. It was a reminder of the great responsibility that came with being a king. Yudhisthira had always been a man of deep conscience, guided by a sense of Dharma, the moral code that governed his act. Now more than ever, he knew that he would need to adhere to this code in order to lead his kingdom wisely and justly. His brothers Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, and Sahadeva stood by his side, each of them playing an important role in the administration of the kingdom. Bhima, with his great strength, was tasked with overseeing the security of the kingdom and ensuring that the people were protected from any external threat. Arjuna, the greatest of the warriors, took charge of the military, ensuring that Hastinapura remained safe and strong. Nakula and Sahadeva, the twin brothers known for their wisdom and sense of fairness, were appointed to oversee the affairs of the people, ensuring that justice was served and that the kingdom's resources were used wisely. Together, the 5 brothers formed a united front, each of them contributing to the welfare of the kingdom in their own unique way. Despite the grand ceremony and the outward appearance of peace, the Pandyas knew that their rule would not be without challenges. The people of Hastinapura had been scarred by years of tyranny under the Kauravas, and many of them had become disillusioned with the very idea of kingship. There were those who longed for the return of the old ways when kings ruled with absolute power, and there were others who feared that the Pandyas might follow in the footsteps of their predecessors, ruling with an iron, that Yudhishthira, with his unwavering commitment to Dharma, was determined to show the people that a ruler could be both just and compassionate, that a king's duty was not to amass power but to serve the people. The first test of Yudhishthira, this rule came not from external enemies, but from within the kingdom itself. A faction of discontented nobles, led by the ambitious Shakuni's followers, sought to undermine the Pandyas' rule. They believed that the Kauravas had been the rightful rulers, and that the Pandavas' victory had been a result of chance, not justice. This faction stirred up unrest in the kingdom, attempting to sway the people against Yudhishthira and his brother. They spread rumors, sowed seeds of doubt, and tried to turn the people against the new rulers. But Yudhishthira, ever the wise and patient king, took the necessary steps to address the situation. He did not respond with anger or force, but instead called for a council of the kingdom's most trusted advisors. He listened to the concerns of the people and the nobles, taking their grievances seriously, and worked to find peaceful solutions that would restore harmony to the kingdom. Slowly but surely, Yudhishthira's actions proved that he was a ruler of integrity and honor. The people began to trust him, and the unrest began to subside. The Pandyas had shown that their reign would be different, that they were leaders who would seek justice for all, not just for themselves. As the months passed, the kingdom of Hastinapura began to thrive under the rule of the Pandyas. The scars of war slowly healed, and the people began to rebuild their lie. The lands that had once been ravaged by the conflict were now being cultivated again, and the markets, once silent and empty, were now bustling with activity. Yudhishthira's wisdom, Bhima's strength, Arjuna's skill, and the knowledge of Nakula and Sahadeva was slowly but surely restoring order and prosperity to the kingdom. The Pandyas had proven themselves not just in battle, but as rulers who could bring peace and stability to a kingdom that had long been torn apart by conflict. That despite the outward signs of success, there was still a shadow that loomed over the Pandyas. A shadow that came from their past, the memory of the war. The loss of so many lives and the destruction of families weighed heavily on their heart. Though they had won the throne, they could not forget the blood that had been spilled on the battlefield. Yudhishthira, in particular, struggled with the moral cost of the war. He had been the one to lead the Pandyas into battle, and though he had fought for justice, the consequences of the war haunted him. He often found himself in quiet contemplation, seeking guidance from Lord Krishna, wondering if they had truly done the right. Krishna, ever the wise counselor, reassured Yudhishthira that he had followed the path of Dharma. The war had been unavoidable, and it had been fought not for personal gain, but to restore justice to a world that had been overrun by the forces of a Dharma. Yudhishthira, though burdened by the weight of his choices, found comfort in Krishna's words, knowing that he had done all he could to restore righteousness to the world. And so the Pandyas ruled over Hastinapura with wisdom, compassion, and justice. The kingdom flourished, and the people prospered under their rule. The story of the Pandavas' ascension to the throne became a tale of hope and redemption, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, righteousness could prevail. Their reign was marked not by the bloodshed of war, but by the healing of a broken kingdom. and the wisdom of rulers who knew that true power lay not in conquest, but in serving the people. The test of virtue. Years had passed since the Pendas took the throne of Hastapura. The kingdom had flourished under their wise rule, and peace had been restored. Yet, despite the calm that now reigned in the land, the Pandyas were not without their doubt. They knew that no matter how well they ruled, the tests of life, fate, and destiny were never truly over. The challenges they had faced were only the beginning of a far greater journey. This, they understood, was the way of the world. One day, as the sun began to dip low over the city, casting long shadows on the palace walls, Udashira, the eldest of the Pandyas, sat deep in thought. His mind wandered back to the events of the past, to the memories of the great war at Kurukshetra, and the victory that had come with such a high cost. The loss of his dear brother's enemies, the families shattered, and the countless lives that had been taken. It all weighed heavily on his heart, and yet he knew that in the end the Pandyas had fought for Dharma, for righteousness, and for the restoration of justice to a world that had long been lost to darkness. But still doubts lingered in his heart. Was he as king truly doing enough to uphold Dharma? Was he making the right decisions for the people of Hastapura? The thought of leaving anything undone or incomplete troubled him deep. So he sat by the window, his gaze drifting out toward the horizon, hoping for a sign, a reassurance that he was on the right path. As if in answer to his unspoken question, a soft knock came at the door, followed by the voice of his brother, Arjuna. "Elder, you are needed in the court," Arjuna said, his tone calm but urgent. Udashira arose from his seat and followed Arjuna through the halls of the palace, his thoughts still swirling. The weight of his crown, though never far from his mind, felt particularly heavy today when they entered the grand hall. Udashira saw that the court was filled with ministers, advisors, and a few distinguished elders. At the center of the room stood an unfamiliar figure, draped in robes that shimmered like the sky at twilight. The figure was tall, with an aura of both grace and mystery surrounding him. Udashira felt a wave of curiosity and perhaps even trepidation wash over him. The man bowed respectfully as Udashira entered. "Your Majesty, I come with a request," the man said in a voice that seemed to echo with ancient wisdom. "I am a sage from the faraway mountains, and I seek to test the virtue of the Pandyas." There was a long pause in the hall, and all eyes turned to Udashira. He had heard of sages who tested rulers in the past, of how they would challenge their virtues and moral strength in ways that no mere army could. He had never thought it would come to his own door. "A test of virtue?" Udashira repeated, his voice steady, though his heart quickened. "What kind of test do you seek, O sage?" The sage looked around the room at the assembled courtiers, his eyes glowing with an inner fire. "It is not a test of power or wealth," he said. "It is a test of inner strength, of your commitment to Dharma. A true ruler must possess the ability to make difficult decisions when the time comes to stand firm in the face of temptation and to choose righteousness, even when it seems the hardest." Udashira listened intently, his brow furrowing. "And how will you test us, O sage?" he asked, his voice calm yet filled with curiosity. The sage smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "I will present you with 3 challenges, each designed to test your sense of duty, wisdom, and righteousness. Should you succeed, you will prove your worth as rulers, not just of Hastinapura, but of the moral order of the world. The challenge was set before the Pandyas, and though they were warriors of great renown, it was clear that their true strength would be tested not by the sword, but by the choices they made in the face of moral dilemmas. Each of the Pandyas had a different strength, a unique attribute that made them powerful in their own right. Yudhishthira with his wisdom, Bhima with his strength, Arjuna with his skill in battle, Nakula and Sahodava with their insight into the ways of the world together. They formed a team that had once defeated their enemies in the field of war. But now it was the battlefield of the mind and the soul that awaited them. The first challenge was set before them. The sage turned to Yudhishthira and spoke. In a distant village, there lives a man who has stolen a sacred cow. The villagers have brought him to the court for judgment, and they ask for the return of the cow. However, there is a twist. The thief is a poor man with no family, no home, and no means of survival. The cow is the only source of sustenance for his family, and if he is made to return it, his children will surely starve. The sage paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. What will you do, Yudhishthira? Will you uphold justice and demand the return of the cow, or will you show mercy to the thief and allow him to keep the cow for the sake of his family? The court fell silent. Yudhishthira felt the weight of the question pressing upon him. On the one hand, justice demanded that the thief return the stolen cow to its rightful owner. On the other hand, compassion for the man's plight seemed to call for mercy. It was a difficult decision, one that no king should ever have to make. After a long pause, Yudhishthira spoke, his voice steady and clear. I will choose justice, he said, for to uphold Dharma is my duty as a king. The cow must be returned, and the thief must face the consequences of his action. That Yudhishthira's heart was heavy as he spoke those words. He knew that in doing so he would condemn the man's children to starvation, and it pained him deeply to make such a choice. Yet in the world of kingship, where every decision could tip the balance of justice, he knew that there could be no other path. The sage nodded, a look of approval in his eyes. Your decision is wise. You have chosen the path of Dharma, even though it was difficult and painful. A true ruler must sometimes make hard choices for the greater good, even when the consequences are not easy to bear. Yudhishthira felt a sense of relief wash over him, but it was fleeting. He knew that this was only the beginning. The next challenge awaited, and it would test them all in ways they had never imagined. As the sage turned to Arjuna, the brothers braced themselves for the next trial. The eternal struggle, the events of the past, had already shaped the future in ways the Pandavas could never have imagined. The lessons they had learned, the trials they had endured, and the decisions they had made weighed heavily on their shoulders. Yet they continued to strive forward. The world they lived in was vast, filled with kingdoms, sages, and forces that could not always be understood. But through it all, one thing had remained constant: the Pandavas' commitment to Dharma, the path of righteousness, no matter how difficult or burdensome the road may be. It was during one of the many peaceful evenings in Hinapura that the next challenge arose. Yudhishthira had just returned from the royal gardens where he had spent some time meditating on the nature of his rule and his responsibilities to the kingdom. He was deep in thought when a messenger entered the royal hall carrying a letter from a distant kingdom. His name was Unwind, a trusted envoy from a kingdom far beyond the borders of Hinapura, known as Klinga. The letter was sealed with a golden emblem, signifying that it was a matter of great importance. Your Majesty, Arvind said, bowing low before handing over the letter. Yudhishthira accepted it with a nod of gratitude and carefully broke the seal. The message within was brief but deeply troubling. It spoke of a great unrest in Klinga, where a neighboring kingdom had been causing havoc and attempting to overthrow the rulers. The king of Kalina, desperate for help, had sent a plea for aid from Hastinapur. The message requested that the Pandavas send troops to help defend the kingdom and restore order. At first, Yudhishthira was silent. The thought of sending his warriors into a distant land, embroiled in another kingdom's strife, troubled him. As king, he understood that his first duty was to protect his own people, not to become entangled in the conflicts of others. But his sense of duty and his commitment to Dharma urged him to consider the consequences of inaction. If Kanga fell, it would create a ripple effect, one that could eventually reach Hastapura as well. And besides, it was the right thing to do, helping those in need, regardless of the distance or the cost. "I will send help," Yudhishthira finally said, his voice steady. "We cannot allow another kingdom to fall into chaos when we have the means to assist. Prepare the soldiers and gather the resources we need. We will send an army to Kalinga and restore peace to the land." Arvan nodded and quickly left to carry out the king's orders. Yudhishthira's decision, while in line with his sense of duty, did not come without its concerns. His brothers, too, were unsettled by the thought of sending their forces away from Hinna, especially as they had only just begun to stabilize their own kingdom after the Great War. But there was no turning back now. The wheels of destiny were already in motion. A few days later, the Pandyas gathered in the royal court to discuss the details of the mission. Yudhishthira sat at the head of the council, his brow furrowed in deep thought. Beside him, his brothers listened attentively, each one concerned about the potential risks involved. Emma, ever the warrior, was eager for the battle that awaited them, while Arjuna, ever the strategist, began to map out a plan of action. Nola and Sahadeva, with their knowledge of the land, began to consider the logistics of the journey. "We will need to be swift," Arjuna said, pointing to a map of the region. "If we are to reach Kanga in time, we cannot afford to waste a single moment. We must send an advanced party first to assess the situation and secure a foothold before we bring in the full force." Yudhishthira nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, Arjuna, but we must also be cautious. The enemy is likely to be strong, and we cannot underestimate the danger. The last thing we want is to provoke a war on two fronts." For several days, the Pandyas worked tirelessly to prepare for the journey ahead. Soldiers were enlisted, provisions were gathered, and messengers were sent ahead to inform the rulers of Kanga that help was on the way. Yet, despite the outward signs of preparation, a sense of unease lingered in the air. The brothers knew that this mission was more than just a military campaign. It was a test of their resolve, of their commitment to justice, and their ability to navigate the complexities of life and duty. As the days turned into weeks, the Pandavas made their way to Kanga. The journey was long and fraught with challenges, but they remained resolute in their purpose. Along the way they encountered small villages, some of which had already been affected by the conflict. The people were starving, their homes destroyed, and their spirits broke. The sight of such suffering weighed heavily on the hearts of the Pandyas, reminding them of the importance of their mission. Upon reaching the borders of Kalina, they were met by the king's emissaries who led them to the capital. The king of Kalina, a noble ruler by the name of Dharmaputra, welcomed them with open arms, expressing his gratitude for their timely arrival. "We were on the brink of destruction," he said, his voice full of, "Without your help, our kingdom would have surely fallen to ruin." Yudhishthira acknowledged the king's words, but he could not shake the feeling that there was something more to this conflict than met the eye. The situation, while dire, seemed almost too neatly arranged, as if someone had orchestrated the chaos to draw the Pandavas into this conflict. He could not place his finger on it, but his instincts told him that there was more to this story than they were being told. Still, The task before them was clear. They had to restore peace and stability to Kenga, and they would not falter in their duty. The first battles were brutal. The enemy forces were numerous, but they were poorly coordinated, lacking the discipline and unity that the Pandyas brought with them. Arjuna, with his unmatched skill in archery, struck down the enemy's commanders with precision. Emma, with his immense strength, tore through the enemy ranks, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Nula and Sahadeva, ever the tacticians, provided invaluable support, striking where the enemy was weakest and bolstering the morale of their troop. It seemed that victory was within their grasp, but as the battle raged on, something unexpected happened. The Pandyas began to uncover signs that the enemy forces were not merely a rogue band of rebels, as they had been led to believe. There were rumors of a powerful sorcerer who had been manipulating events from the shadows, stirring unrest and using dark magic to fuel the conflict. The sorcerer, it seemed, was none other than a former ally of the Kenga king, someone who had once been close to the throne, but had been cast out for his treachery. This new information sent a shockwave through the Pandyas. They had been sent to Kenga to restore order, but now they realized that they were not simply fighting a kingdom at war. They were facing a far darker force, one that threatened not only Kenga, but the very fabric of Dharma itself. The stakes had never been higher, and the Pandas would have to rely on more than just their weapons to win this battle. The search for truth. The dawn broke slowly over Kalina, casting a warm glow across the battlefield, where the last remnants of the conflict still smoldered. The sounds of clashing swords and battle cries had long since faded into the distance, leaving behind an eerie silence that hung heavily in the air. The Pandyas, still on high alert, stood amidst the ruins, surveying the aftermath of their hard-won victory. The ground was littered with the fallen, and the once proud banners of the enemy now lay torn and tattered in the dirt. Yet even in the midst of this victory, a sense of unease lingered. Udashur, the eldest of the Pandyas, stood apart from the rest of the group, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His mind was racing, caught in the whirlpool of uncertainty that had gripped him since the battle began. Though they had defeated the forces that had threatened Kenga, the true enemy, the shadowy sorcerer who had been manipulating the conflict from the shadows, still eluded them. The thought gnawed at Udish. What had driven this sorcerer to sow such chaos and destruction? Who was he, and what was his ultimate goal? These questions had been haunting the Pandyas ever since they learned the truth about the enemy's true mastermind. The sorcerer had been using dark magic to manipulate the hearts and minds of the people, turning allies into enemies and brothers into traitors. But his reasons and the nature of his power remained a mystery. Udisha knew that the battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. The sorcerer's influence was still out there, hidden like a serpent waiting to strike again. As the Pandyas gathered for a council meeting, Udisha shared his concerns with his brothers. They too were troubled by the unanswered questions that lingered in the air. Bhima, ever the one to jump into action, suggested they launch a full-scale search for the sorcerer. "We cannot allow him to slip away," he insisted, his voice heavy with determination. "He must be found and dealt with once and for all." Arjuna, however, was more cautious. "I agree that the sorcerer must be stopped," he said, "but we must approach this carefully. His power is not something to be underestimated, and if we rush in without understanding the full scope of his abilities, we may find ourselves at a disadvantage." Yudhisthira, ever the voice of reason, nodded. "Arjuna is right. We need to be strategic in our approach, but we also cannot afford to delay. We must uncover the truth of this sorcerer and put an end to his dark machinations before he causes more harm. Nekula and Sahadeva, who had been quietly listening, exchanged glances. Both of them had an innate understanding of the land and its people, and they knew that the answers they sought would not be found through brute force alone. Perhaps we should seek guidance from the sages, Naka suggested. They have knowledge of ancient magics and hidden truths that may help us find the sorcerer and understand his motives. Yudhishthira's eyes lit up at the suggestion. The sages of the land were known for their wisdom and insight, and their knowledge of the mystical world could prove invaluable. Yes, he said, we will seek out the sages and ask for their guidance. They may know of this sorcerer or of any hidden forces that could aid us in our search. The Pandyas set out on their journey to find the sages, traveling deep into the forests of Kalinga, where the ancient hermitages were nestled. These hermitages were sacred places untouched by the turmoil of the world, where the wisest of sages meditated on the mysteries of existence. The journey was long and treacherous, but the Pandyas were undeterred. They knew that the answers they sought lay within the knowledge of these great sages. As they ventured deeper into the forest, they encountered many strange sights and sounds. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the rustling of leaves seemed to echo with an otherworldly resonance. The further they went, the more they felt as though they were stepping into a realm beyond the physical, a place where the laws of nature did not always apply. It was as though the very fabric of reality was thinner here, and the veil between the mortal world and the divine world was at its weakest. Finally, after several days of travel, they arrived at a secluded hermitage, where a sage known as Vedyasa resided. Vivyasa was a master of ancient texts, and one of the few sages who had access to the hidden knowledge of the universe. He was known to have foresight into the future and an understanding of the cosmic balance that governed the world. Yudhishthira approached the sage with reverence, bowing before him. "O great sage, we seek your wisdom." He said, "A sorcerer has caused great turmoil in Kalinga, and we seek to understand his motives and powers. Please guide us in our search for the truth." Vidyavasa regarded Yudhishthira with a calm gaze, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that seemed to pierce through time itself. "You seek the truth of this sorcerer," he said, his voice soft but filled with authority. "But the truth you seek is not easily found. This sorcerer is no ordinary being. He is a shadow of a long-forgotten past, a remnant of an ancient power that was sealed away long ago. His motives are tied to the very fabric of the universe, and his actions have the potential to unravel the balance of all." Yudhishthira's heart sank at these words. The sorcerer, it seemed, was not just a rogue magician or a power-hungry villain. He was something far older and more dangerous. Vidyavasa continued, "To understand the sorcerer, you must first understand the nature of the forces he wields. He is a servant of the Asuras, the ancient beings of darkness who once waged war against the gods themselves. His power comes from their ancient magic, a magic that was thought to be lost to time. But it has returned, and with it the potential to bring about a new age of darkness." The Pandyas listened intently, their minds reeling at the enormity of what they were hearing. The sorcerer was not just a man. They were dealing with a force that had ties to the very beginning of creation itself. But even as fear began to creep into their hearts, they knew that they could not turn away from this challenge. The balance of the world was at stake, and they, as the chosen ones, were the only ones who could stop it. "How can we stop him?" Arjuna asked, his voice filled with determination. Vidyavasa looked at him with a knowing expression. The sorcerer's power is tied to the ancient artifacts of the Ars. If you wish to defeat him, you must first find these artifacts and destroy them. Only then will his power be severed, and he will no longer be a threat. The Pandyas exchanged a look. The journey ahead was perilous, and the stakes had never been higher. But they were resolved to see it through. They would find the artifacts, destroy them, and put an end to the sorcerer's dark reign once and for all. The triumph of truth, the journey to find and destroy the Asura artifacts, had taken the Pandaverse to the farthest corners of the earth. They had crossed vast deserts, trekked through thick jungles and scaled treacherous mountains. Along the way, they encountered many dangers, beasts of the wild, traps set by dark forces, and the ever-looming threat of the sorcerer's magic that seemed to follow them no matter how far they travelled. But through it all, their resolve never wavered. They knew that the fate of the world rested on their shoulders, and they could not afford to fail. Yudhisthira, the eldest of the brothers, had always been the most thoughtful and cautious of the group, but even he could not deny the growing sense of urgency that pressed upon them. The closer they came to their goal, the more he could feel the weight of the task ahead. Each day brought new challenges, and with each challenge, the sense of inevitability grew stronger. They were on the brink of something monumental, an end to the sorcerer's dark influence, but also a new beginning for the world. It was in the shadow of the final mountain that the Pandavas found themselves standing before the last of the aura artifacts, a massive stone tablet covered in ancient runes that pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly light. The tablet was said to be the source of the sorcerer's most powerful magic, and it had been hidden away in this remote temple for centuries, protected by powerful wards and deadly traps. It was here, in this forgotten corner of the world, that the final confrontation would take place. As they entered the temple, the air grew thick with the weight of ages past. The walls were adorned with murals depicting battles between gods and their faces twisted in eternal conflict. The Pandyas could feel the power of the place, the ancient energy that still lingered in the stone. It was a place of great darkness, a place that had once been the battleground of gods, but it was also a place where the light of truth could shine if they could only find a way to unlock its secrets. Arjuna, always the warrior, was the first to step. His bow Gandiva was ready in his hands, the string taut and humming with power. But even he felt the weight of the moment. They had faced many challenges together, but this was different. This was the culmination of their journey, the moment when everything they had fought for would either succeed or fail. "This is it," he said, his voice steady but filled with the gravity of the situation. "The final step. Once we destroy this artifact, the sorcerer's power will be broken. There will be no more darkness, no more fear." Yudhisthira nodded, his face solemn. "Yes," he said. "But remember, destroying the artifact is not just about ending the sorcerer's reign. It is also about restoring balance to the world. This artifact, this power, has been tied to the very fabric of existence for too long. We must be careful, for if we are not, the consequences may be far greater than we anticipate." The other Pandyas nodded in agreement. Bhima clenched his fists, ready to strike down any obstacle that might stand in their way. "We've come too far to turn back now," he said. "This ends today." Nakula and Sahadeva, the ever-diligent twins, were already scanning the room, their eyes searching for any signs of danger. They had learned long ago that every temple, every ancient ruin was filled with hidden traps and threats. Their experience with the land and its secrets had helped the Pandyas survive countless challenges, and they were certain this would be no different. As they approached the stone tablet, a deep rumble echoed through the temple, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble. The air grew colder, and the shadows around them seemed to shift and move as though alive. It was clear that the sorcerer's magic still held sway here, even in the heart of the temple. But the Pandyas were not afraid. They had faced far worse and come through it stronger. Udadush raised his hand, signaling for the others to hold back. He approached the tablet slowly, his eyes studying the runes that covered its surface. The inscriptions were written in an ancient language, one that had not been spoken for millennia. But even without understanding the words, Udish could sense the power that radiated from the tablet. It was the same power that had corrupted the sorcerer, the same power that had twisted the minds of so many. "This is it," Udisha said quietly, his voice filled with both awe and resolve. "The source of the darkness, but it can be destroyed. We have the power to end it." With a swift motion, Udisha raised his hand and began to chant the sacred words that had been passed down through the generations. The words were ancient, spoken only in times of great need, and they carried with them the weight of countless generations of knowledge and power. As he chanted, the stone tablet began to glow brighter, the runes lighting up in response to his words. The air hummed with energy, and the Pandyas could feel the ground shake beneath them as the power of the tablet began to resist. But Udisha's resolve did not falter. He knew that they could not fail. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, and faced too many dangers to let this final step be their undoing. With one last burst of energy, Udisha uttered the final words of the chant, and the tablet shattered into 1,000 pieces. The explosion of light that followed was blinding, and for a moment it seemed as though time itself had stopped. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp and bend, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. When the light finally faded, the temple was silent once more. The tablet was gone, reduced to dust and ashes, and with its destruction, the dark magic that had been corrupting the world was broken. The sorcerer's power was gone, and with it, the fear and uncertainty that had gripped the land. The Pandyas stood in the aftermath of the battle, their hearts filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," Arjuna said, his voice filled with wonder. "The darkness is gone." The world as Udisha smiled, though his expression was tinged with sadness. "Yes," he said, "but remember, the world is never truly free of darkness. It is always there lurking in the shadows, waiting for a chance to rise again. A task is not just to defeat the darkness when it comes, but to keep the light shining, no matter how hard the battle may be." The Pandyas nodded in agreement, their hearts heavy with the weight of the knowledge they had gained. Their journey had been long and hard, but it had been worth it. They had triumphed over the darkness, not just with strength, but with wisdom, unity, and courage. And in doing so, they had ensured that the balance of the world would be restored, at least for now. As they made their way out of the temple and into the sunlight, they knew that their journey was far from over. There would always be new challenges, new battles to fight. But they also knew that as long as they stood together, no darkness would ever be too great to overcome. And so, with the sorcerer's power shattered and the balance of the world restored, the Pandyas set out once again, this time not in search of victory, but in search of peace. This concludes our journey from the endless cycles and divine epics of Hindu mythology. My life gained meaning through the law of karma, where every action has a consequence, and the search for moksha, the eternal journey of the soul. We learned that Shiva's destruction actually opens the door to a new creation. Vishnu's preserving hand and the unwavering path of Dharma carry our life toward universal peace. This mythology allows us to explore the reality beyond the visible. After learning these secrets, don't forget to subscribe